So much, Roxy, for the introduction and for the invitation to speak with you all this evening. I'm super happy to be here and hopefully provide you a little bit of an overview about biosolids and septage in New York State and some of the regulations and kind of where we are on the research front around it and some guidelines and safety associated with it as it relates to land application in agriculture. So before I get started, as Roxy mentioned, I'm at Cornell University and I'm the new director of the New York Center for Organics, Recycling, and Education. So if anyone has been aware of or engaged with the Cornell Waste Management Institute before, which has been at Cornell for almost 40 years, a little under 40 years, the Cornell Waste Management Institute has now evolved into this new New York core. And so I'm taking over as director there, and we have a lot of new exciting things coming out. And we'll be kind of expanding and continuing a lot of the work of the Cornell Waste Management Institute. And so I'm really excited for what we'll be doing moving forward. But one of those topics that has been a very hot topic lately, and probably one of the reasons why I'm speaking to you this evening, is about biosolids and obviously PFAS as well, which I'll touch upon in the brief presentation. And I think, Roxy, you said 15 to 30 minutes. I have about 17 slides or so, but I can get talking, so just cut me off if you need.
Oh, you're good.
I'm good. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So, all right. Well, with that, get started. And so I just have a few slides on septage, and for the most part, I'm going to focus on biosolids and then some ways we can think about remediation with biosolids. But first off, I really want to define what septage is. So this is waste from septic tanks, portable toilets, cesspools. This could be composting toilets, things like that. And so all septage that is intended for land application, so there's a storage component to it and then a land application component. So everything around septage is regulated and they must be registered facilities with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. So everything with septage is regulated under this DEC code. And so within the slides, and Roxy can share these if she hasn't already, there are links to where this can be found on the DEC website. And anyone who is applying septage or a registered facility, they are required to submit an annual report. And this is all publicly available information. And they need to keep their records for 5 years. And again, here's a link to basically go to the DEC website and see annual reports. And so you could see that for all the regions across New York State of who is a registered facility. When it comes to actual land application of septage, there's a few requirements around it. One of those things is that there's a screening that must take place, and the materials must be unrecognizable, essentially. And also the pH of that septage material must be raised to a very basic pH, 12 or higher before application. And this is typically done with something like an agricultural lime. And there are set requirements and analyses that need to take place to monitor this change. And that essentially leads to a pathogen reduction. Never are we talking about complete elimination, right? But the septage must be screened before it's land applied for removal of any visible materials. And you can kind of see what a screen potentially would look like up here in the top right. So I'm going to hold questions just until the end. So if there are questions as I'm speaking, feel free to write those. But if the chat pops up, I don't know. It's a little tricky with my screens to answer those on the fly. But in terms of land application, it must be applied uniformly as much as possible and at agronomic rates. And so these agronomic rates correspond to the nitrogen needs of the crop. And there's strict regulations in terms of what types of crop septage can be applied to, and then harvest and other intervals following the land application. And once again, this is all available and outlined on the DEC website. So when we think of the Cayuga Lake watershed and the counties there, I think hopefully I'm right on the 3 counties making up the watershed, but currently there are no solid waste management facilities registered in either Cayuga or Tompkins County that are applying biosolids or septage. There are 2 in Seneca County that are registered to apply septage. But within the 3 counties, none for biosolids. So just putting that there. And once again, there's a publicly available map where you can choose county, you can choose the waste material, and see who is a registered facility. And this can be municipalities, these can be private companies, so it's all there. So that's briefly about septage, but moving on to biosolids, which I think is the one more talked about by folks. And so biosolids are the solid or semi-solid organic materials resulting from wastewater treatment. So typically there's an effluent component, and this gets discharged to water bodies. And then there's the solid kind of biosolids component, also referred to as sewage sludge, that goes through some type of process. It varies. I'll show a figure in a couple of slides, just what that looks like, the distribution of its disposal here in New York State. But it's typically the majority are landfilled. There's incineration, long-term storage, or what the DEC refers to as beneficial use, which could be deemed safe for application to agricultural lands. And so the idea here is that biosolids provide nutrients and organic material, so they're a carbon source, they're a nutrient and carbon source, and from a crop and agricultural standpoint, that's very beneficial, and it helps cut down on the potential need for synthetic fertilizers or external fertilizers or inputs to a farm. And so the idea is there's the nutrient and organic matter addition. It offsets costs for farmers because it's a lower value input compared to synthetic or other types of amendments. And then it diverts these materials from landfills, helps reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other, specifically methane coming from landfills. And it also is a way for municipalities to dispose of large quantities of material. So those are some of the reasons why biosolids are used and are land applied. And that's before we get to any kind of safety and other issues like that. So that would be the reason for the beneficial use designation. So in New York State, roughly 16% of biosolids produced annually fall under this beneficial use determination by the DEC. And there are certain criteria that the biosolids must meet for that designation of beneficial use. And so when we take that 16%, roughly just under 13,000 dry tons is land applied across 30,000 permitted acres. So once again, the acres must be registered and permitted with the DEC, and there are various steps for that to be a permitted land application area. And so if we look at this kind of from a figure perspective, what I said, the majority of biosolids within New York State are landfilled. Certain percentage are incinerated. And then there's a 16% beneficial use. And you can see this number is higher than what I just mentioned. But of this 16%, less than 5% is land applied across the entire state. And so that equates to actually less than 0.1% in actively farmed acres across the state. Other beneficial uses that biosolids would fall under if they are not land applied would be composting facilities. There's heat drying or pelletization of the material itself. And then there's also could be a chemical stabilization process. So there are a couple of different categories even within that beneficial use determination. So not all biosolids deemed beneficial use are land applied. So just making that clear. So when it comes to the regulation, like I've been saying, the DEC regulates everything around the use of biosolids, particularly as it relates to land application, but also storage, handling, everything like that. There are different classes associated with biosolids as well, and I'm going to talk about that more within on the next slide. But some of the permitting requirements under these different parts 361 by the DEC, biosolids, there needs to be a certification by a professional engineer, plans, specifications, obviously the permits for the land application. There's pretty strict testing and monitoring, and there can be regular inspections and annual reporting. But a lot of this is self-reporting, but there are inspections by the DEC regularly around this. So when it comes to safety, the standards we have in New York State by the DEC are stricter than actually those at the federal level, so set by the EPA. And so at the federal level, there's 3 classifications. There's Class A, Class B, and Class AEQ. In New York State, we really only designate biosolids either under this Class AEQ, which is this exceptional quality, or this Class B. And all these classifications are really based on pathogen level reduction. So specifically fecal coliform and salmonella. And so for land application in New York State, it must meet this Class A exceptional quality standard, and it requires non-detectable levels of fecal coliform and salmonella, and it must meet the thresholds for 9 toxic metals. And so that's what we mean by getting this classification of Class AEQ, or what DEC means. And so we're talking about non-detectable levels. We're not necessarily talking about total elimination, right? We can't verify that 100% is eliminated ever, but it's non-detectable based on analytical capabilities. And so once it meets this classification, biosolids are deemed safe for land application, but they can also be mixed in to compost and other products that end up being sold and could be utilized by homeowners and others kind of without necessarily knowing that they're biosolids within that. And Casella, for example, I think everyone knows Casella, the waste management company. There have been a lot of issues and closure of a large composting facility in Maine because of findings of PFAS and other, mainly PFAS, that has led to the closure there. So there's just some safety issues around it. And so currently there are very few, if any. I mean, there are few here in New York State. There's some interim guidelines, which I will mention, around PFAS, but there are few safety thresholds around emerging pollutants, including PFAS, which are these per and polyfluoroalkyl substances. So that's why I say PFAS, but this is also PFOA, PFOS. There's various different acronyms you might hear, but they kind of all fall under these forever chemicals. The DEC has done a fairly robust analysis and research looking at kind of microplastics and pharmaceuticals and their potential impacts on human health, and have found that still stand by the beneficial use determination of biosolids based on the research that they have supported. But there's a lot that we do not know about PFAS. And so what is PFAS, did I say? And just to make sure everyone's on the same page, I'm sure everyone's heard of these compounds at this point. Like I said, this is what it stands for. And essentially these are tens of thousands of man-made chemicals. So there's synthetic chemicals that have this really, really strong carbon and fluorine bond. They've been around for almost a century at this point, and they're widely found in our everyday products. Non-stick cookware, so Teflon is the most famous one that people can think of that contains PFAS. Firefighting foam is one that's gotten a lot of attention, but some of our water-resistant clothing contains PFAS compounds, so it's in a lot of our everyday products, and it's fairly, I would say, ubiquitous in the environment at this point, just because it's out there and been out there for a long time. They found it in rainwater, for example. Why it gets this name, or people refer to it as forever chemicals, is because that bond is extremely stable and very resistant to degradation or natural kind of degradation processes in the environment. And it tends to move a lot in soil and water, and it bioaccumulates in the environment. So further we get up kind of the food web, it gets in higher and higher concentrations. And so it's been found to concentrate because of that bioaccumulation in compost and other organic materials. And there's been significant evidence kind of linking it to not only environmental issues, but human health issues as well, issues with reproductivity, infertility, cancers, and things like that. This link here is just kind of for interest. If a colleague at Cornell, as well as some collaborators in Michigan, I think Penn State, they recently put out this PFAS risk where you can go as an individual and kind of determine how at risk are you for PFAS exposure based on your area code and your lifestyle. So just something if you're of interest or have a moment and would like to look that up. So kind of how does PFAS get into the environment? There are many different ways, but the largest source is through basically industrial processes, manufacturing sites, and discharge into streams, water bodies, or, any landfill material, any leachate that comes off from that landfill, farm fields with spreading of biosolids if they're contaminated, and then it can enter obviously drinking water potentially, or our wastewater treatment facilities that have to deal with both domestic and industrial wastewater. So typically places like wastewater treatment plants that only deal with domestic wastewater, or the majority is domestic wastewater, you find fairly negligible PFAS in the sewage sludge, but wastewater treatment plants that are processing industrial wastewater tend to have a lot because of the materials coming out of those facilities. So the levels of PFAS in any wastewater treatment plant varies widely. It's very heterogeneous, so it's all over the place. Some have high levels, some have very low levels, and it's hard to lump them all into one. So I think that's important to mention. But I think this is a really great schematic that if you look up National Wildlife Federation, you can kind of see, or let's say a really nice infographic about PFAS in the environment. And so back to here in New York State, the DEC put out this interim strategy recently, fairly recently, to control PFAS compounds, recognizing we need to do more research, we need more information about it. And it came out of the EPA's strategic roadmap. And that, so here in New York State, all facilities that accept biosolids, there's basically sampling and reporting requirements around that. And they must fall under these thresholds, which are under 20 parts per billion. And you can see this says PFOS, PFOA. So these are slightly different long and short chain PFAS compounds. So sorry, a lot of acronyms there, but you can think of it kind of, I guess, PFAS as a whole, and the required action if the levels are above a certain threshold. So note, again, this is parts per billion. The requirements within drinking water, I believe, are under or four parts per trillion. And so it's very important just noting the units there, that drinking water requirements are an order of magnitude lower than what needs to be found within biosolids. And so the guidance or kind of recommendations, let's say coming out of Cornell, what has been said for a long time from previous colleagues and Professor Emeritus at Cornell and the Cornell Waste Management Institute, is this case for caution when it comes to applying biosolids to farmland. That there continues to be a lot that we don't know. And I think Cornell continues to stand behind this idea that we need more basic and applied research. We need to get a better handling of what's being found in biosolids, particularly with PFAS, but then other potential emerging contaminants that we don't know about. 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it could have been heavy metals, and today it's PFAS, and what could be the next issue. So really being cautious and when it comes to applying biosolids to farmland. And so this idea, there's very high uncertainty about removing persistent organic pollutants, including PFAS, during the treatment process of biosolids. There's this bioaccumulation and potential bioaccumulation in both crops and animals after biosolids have been land applied. And we know there's detrimental health effects, but are there opportunities to limit the toxicity before we apply biosolids on the land? And so some promising technologies, or one technology I really want to highlight as a promising one that we're doing some work here in New York State and have actively been for some time, is pyrolysis. If you haven't heard of pyrolysis, it's the controlled heating of organic materials like biosolids, but it is any organic material that's sustainably sourced. So a big feedstock for pyrolysis here in New York State is woody waste material. And also dairy manure, it could be corn stover residue, it could be any waste or organic waste material. But for this example specifically, I'm talking about biosolids. And pyrolysis differs from incineration because it's in the absence of oxygen. So we're lacking oxygen with this process, and we're not getting combustion. So just to know, because a lot of people get confused, pyrolysis and incineration, they're completely different processes, and it's due to the lack of oxygen within pyrolysis. And so really what that does is help stabilize the material. And there's been evidence, a fair bit of evidence, and people are really actively working in this space, that PFAS actually pyrolysis destroys PFAS compounds during the process, and then we produce this biochar product, which is a carbon-rich material that is used as a long-term soil amendment. So I've been researching or working with biochar for almost 14 years now. We're going on 15 years. And in the last 3 years, I've been involved in a trial looking at biosolids biochar. And there's other research happening, and I'm going to highlight that in another couple slides. And so the research is showing that pyrolysis can actually remove PFAS from biosolids and other materials up to 99%. And this is directly tied to the production conditions used during the pyrolysis process. Sorry if I'm being too technical. I'm trying to explain terms that might be new to folks, but there might still be questions. So if anything's unclear, please make sure you ask me. And so really, we need to do more research in this area, both basic and applied, as it relates to biosolids and land application, as well as the fate of PFAS and other contaminants in the environment. I think we really don't have a grasp of where PFAS is across the state, particularly as it relates to our agricultural lands, and we need monitoring and quantification of that. And figuring out how do we remediate lands that have been contaminated with PFAS. There's a lot coming out of Maine of what do we do with fields that have had long-term 30+ years of biosolids application. Do these essentially become Superfund sites? And how is that affecting the off-site impacts, like a watershed, or our lakes and the fish and other animals that are in our lakes and rivers and streams. There's more research, and there's a lot going on in kind of creating regulatory thresholds. More for soils. There's been a lot more work done on water and drinking water in particularly. And there's actually, I'm sure folks may have heard of this, but there's a state, it's in the Senate, it's on hold right now until the next legislative session, but a moratorium about the land application of biosolids, basically until more research is done. So that's in the legislature right now, but hasn't been signed or approved yet. And then obviously there's an economics factor around all of this. Who pays for it? Who invests in this type of technology? Who's responsible for it? And so I want to highlight this just quickly, this research that I've been involved in around biosolids biochar, and we're still analyzing the data, and there's a continuation of this project, so I don't have final data to share with you all, but I just kind of wanted to put this on your radar that this type of work is happening at Cornell and with partners across the state and region. But we're looking at biochar produced from biosolids through the pyrolysis process, and other kind of more novel amendments such as human urine, and getting both the natural and the social science perspective on that. Or the natural, let's say the data, and then the social science perspective. And so we've been conducting field trials in New York and Vermont over the last 3 years to see how these amendments affect soil health and crop performance. And then basically a social researcher has been interviewing farmers and other community members to see what are the social perceptions around utilization of these products. So for this study, we're not looking at biosolids application, but we're looking at biochar produced from biosolids. So where we have that removal of PFAS from the material, and still trying to see what do people think about that. And so just sharing the treatments that we're looking at or we're evaluating in this study, and the idea is it's all connected back to urea, which is the most widely used nitrogen fertilizer. And do these amendments actually produce crops as equally as urea in terms of production, and what are the impacts to soil health? And so I'm just going to share what we're seeing in terms of impacts on crop yield, and this is silage corn, so it would be corn going to dairies, to animals, and really we see a few differences in this year, but overall a lot of these more organic amendments are performing equally as well as our synthetic urea when it comes to overall yield. There are tons of other parameters we're evaluating, but I'm just kind of highlighting this as a big picture. And this was over 3 years, I said 2023 to 2025 in New York and in Vermont. And this is another trial that's building off this previous trial funded by the Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, and brought on some colleagues from the University of Michigan around expanding the work to look at is there actual removal of PFAS via pyrolysis. And so there's a lot being done at the commercial scale, and companies who are saying, yes, there's removal and we're not finding any PFAS, and the EPA has come to monitor our site, and there's no PFAS, but at the research, we need data and science to back those claims, right? And then do biosolids biochar filter PFAS and other pharmaceuticals in the environment? So if we were to apply biochar made from biosolids, does it actually act like a sponge and capture, basically from a remediation standpoint, biosolids or other compounds that have been, or contaminants that are already in the environment? And then can we produce a biochar-based fertilizer that's not obviously leading to any further contamination? So some of what I've said as it relates to biosolids and concerns here in New York State, we wrote an extension publication, this research brief, which can be found on the newyorksoilhealth.org website. So it kind of just summarizes a bunch of what I said about biosolids and some considerations and need for further research in this area. So I just wanted to put that out there as a resource for everyone, just a 2-page front back handout that can be printed. And so just to wrap up here, so overall, all solid waste management, all organics, biosolids, septage, other materials, they're regulated by the Department of Environmental Conservation here in New York State. Regular testing is required, permitting is required. There is quite a lot of oversight on it. And New York State is stricter than other states. Caution is needed when it comes to land application. As I mentioned, There's a lot we don't know, particularly as it relates to PFAS and other potentially emerging contaminants, ones that we might not even be able to measure at this point. But unfortunately, biosolids are not just wastewater treatment plants issues. They're community issues. They're individual issues. So it's everyone's problem. And at the end of the day, we need to be thinking about alternatives to landfilling our biosolids. We're running out of landfill space. There's we need to be thinking proactively and with alternative ideas in mind. And this gets at this kind of circular bionutrient economy issue or circularity, obviously in thinking about this in a safe and sustainable manner. The DEC has established an interim strategy around PFAS, and this is the idea of we need more research, but we know we need to put limits before it's out in the environment there. And so, as I keep saying, we're working on the research front. There's a lot of activities in this space on both basic and applied, so on farm as well as laboratory research. With more data, we'll be able to convey more information and science-backed information to the public, which I think is very important in this day and age. So some resources, the Cornell Waste Management Institute website, that is still active. At the end of the year, that will turn into this New York Core website, so you'll be redirected, but a lot of the resources that are there as it relates to biosolids and other organic amendments will be on the new website. And then New York Soil Health also has a bunch of great resources. If you would like to follow up or have any other questions after this evening, feel free to shoot me an email. It's right there. So with that, I'll open it up for discussion and any questions.
Tony, you have your hand up? Go ahead, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. A very clear presentation, much appreciated. Couple of questions. Has federal funding in any way impacted your testing and monitoring of PFASs and chemicals in general in biosolids?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think overall, there have been huge federal funding disruptions. I currently don't have, besides that one project that's at FFAR, that Foundation for Food and Agriculture Research, which is a federal grant. I'm not specifically involved in or have a grant around PFAS right now. But generally, federal funding has been heavily disrupted this last year, and it has overall affected research, not just as it relates to this, but obviously other topics as well.
Yeah, and my second question is, I live in Seneca County, big agricultural industry. Have PFASs been removed from being used by farmers and others in the ag sector?
So maybe I misspoke. So PFAS is not like it's found in everyday products. The farmers aren't applying it, right? But it's found as compounds because that carbon fluorine bond is found in pesticides, for example. It's found in firefighting foam. It's found in non-stick cookware.
Right.
And so it's a synthetic compound found in many different products. So it's not just farmers. People aren't applying it really, in a way they don't know. Many people don't know it's in a lot of these everyday products. So it's not, it ends up, I feel like finger gets pointed at farmers, but it also comes from other places.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned pesticides. That was one reason why I thought farmers could potentially remove it or not. What do you think?
You mean remove
Remove the
PFAS?
products that contain the PFASs.
Yeah, that's a very good question, and I am not an analytical chemist, but I think that it's that carbon fluorine bond that is found in so many products that and there's all different short and long chain PFAS compounds. And so it's very difficult to have outright elimination of it, because it's so widespread at this point. So you can't just say, hey, eliminate it, because it's in everything, not just farmer products and in all consumer products.
Yeah, I mean, you would think, okay, we've discovered after 50 years, we've got a real chemical problem. You would think all of the different chemical industries, DuPont and company,
Yeah.
would all be saying, okay, let's pull it. Or I mean, I wouldn't expect the federal government at this point to be making anyone in industry do anything. But yeah,
Yeah, I will say there's certainly active research happening in this area about alternative products that can have be as effective as materials that contain the PFAS, I think. But I think there's still a lot of work to do in that space. But companies are working towards not utilizing those materials.
thank you.
Thank
Hi,
you.
Isaac.
So I two questions. And some of this I was speaking with a former coworker who's down in Pennsylvania today about this. She's an ag tech for a conservation district. And they're seeing a bunch of most of their biosolids are actually coming in from New Jersey. There's a company that's importing them through brokers, and then the brokers are spreading them. I mean, we could get into the whole, difference of ag laws in Pennsylvania and New York and et cetera. But I guess that the main point of my question was, are we seeing that in New York State too, or are they mostly coming from local, wastewater treatment plants and such? Or are they coming in from out of state?
Yeah, that's a really good question. It's both. There is out of state, depends on where you are in the state. I can't say specifically. I'm a little bit more aware of things happening in the North Country right now, up in Clinton, Franklin counties. But biosolids get brought in from Vermont, even from Canada. They do get brought across borders. So while there is local application, there is also these kind of transboundary applications too. Because
Yeah,
everyone's
that's
looking to get rid of their biosolids.
right. Yeah, that's kind of what I figured when she said that. And she's out of Bradford County, and they've got a lot of land, and New Jersey doesn't have nearly as much land, so it makes sense that they're sending them to states that have more available land. The other question, and you kind of touched on this a little bit, I think, but we got talking, and there was an instance, I think it was in Michigan, where a farmer had applied biosolids or sludge, I'm not sure which, to his fields, and then fed the hay to his beef cattle, and then the whole herd had to be quarantined. And I don't know if it was they found heavy metals or what exact compound or contaminant they found. But has there been research done in New York on that? And my thinking there was, well, if it's showing up in the meat of the beef, then it's probably showing up in the milk of the dairy cows if you spread it on corn silage that they're then feeding to the dairy cows.
Yeah, a really good question, and I don't know fully. But certainly the case you mentioned in Michigan, that's happened in Texas and other states too. There have definitely been a lot of articles in the news lately about this. I don't know specifically here in New York State about that. I'm not sure if there's any testing ongoing kind of in milk. Obviously, we know milk is a huge product here in New York and very important for our agricultural economy, the dairy industry. So I'm not sure. I'm not aware of what testing is happening in that space.
Thanks, Debbie. This was great presentation. Just fantastic.
Thank you. I hope it provided a little bit of a high level overview for everyone.
That's very helpful. Yes, Tian.
A couple questions. Just one comment. I know that I was on the sewer joint subcommittee when Casella Waste Management did come to the Ithaca area wastewater treatment plant and was pitching this, we'll come and take your sludge and apply it, and you don't have to worry about where we take it. And that was an interesting discussion. And Isaac, when asked about the impact on food and humans, they were quick to say, oh, well, we're just going to be spreading it on agricultural fields growing corn and feed crops. And it was very it was funny to see them expect us to believe that it wasn't going to work its way up the food chain there. But I don't think at that point we did not approve the application, but it was a bit of an eye opener. And so it led me actually to go to Cornell. Cynthia Brock and I went to Cornell, and we went to the Lehman lab, which has a pyrolysis project going on. And I wonder if you're working with them at all, and how their work is progressing.
Yes. So to that, yes, I work very closely with Johannes Lehman,
Right.
is who you're referring to. Yeah, we are on that project. I showed a figure on that. He's on that project as well. And also we're on a project, which he leads, is pyrolyzing dairy manure at a dairy here in central New York in Cayuga County in Union Springs.
Okay.
That's wrapping up this at the end of this year. That project, that was a pilot project there looking at pyrolyzing dairy manure. And I can give a whole presentation on that. But yeah, I was involved in that project. So yes, I work very closely with Johannes, and we're on a lot of these projects together. Yeah.
Do you think that, I know he was very, very kind and very good at dumbing down the information for someone without a solid scientific background. I wonder if he might be someone we may want to consider as a speaker as well. I think this is a really interesting topic for our group, should be, or maybe he'd even let us come look at his lab. I don't know. Just put that out to Roxy and Darby to think about, because it's kind of it's a nice field trip. And then the other thing is, maybe we could ask Margaret to talk to us about the legislation, the proposed legislation that's currently under review at the state level. And Roxy, did we send a letter of support?
We did not, because in the end, the several different things, but a couple of the big things that came up was it's just not because we're running out of landfill space. It actually might not be viable for everyone to suddenly start trying to send all of their stuff to landfills for 5 years. And there was a real concern about that from the Water Environment Federation, which is the industry organization for wastewater plants. And then another issue was that earlier versions of the bill included support for farmers, and I think it was a research component, and both of those have been removed now. So that seemed unfortunate to us. So we just felt like we weren't completely comfortable with the way the current resolution that's being circulated is written. So we're stepping back to learn more now, and probably provide some input in the spring of next year. And this is step one of learning more.
So I would suggest you invite Anna Kellis to respond to your questions directly. There are things that I could say, but I don't want to take up too much airtime in this meeting. Only about 20% of biosolids generated in New York State do not already go to landfills. And the support for farmers was paired with testing requirements for farmers that were also taken out. So shifting the responsibility to DEC to do the testing. And we can talk more. I would love if we could get Anna in this conversation sooner rather than later.
Yeah, we're looking at having maybe the WEF rep and possibly Anna's office or someone to represent the bill, both maybe be at our January meeting to address some of those concerns and hear more about that.
Yeah, I
It's a
think
fair
Anna will
thing.
want to speak to it directly.
Yeah.
So, yep.
Okay, great, thank you. Other questions? Because I have a couple. All right. You mentioned the DEC has done some research. They aren't nearly complete on PFAS, but on like microplastics and the pharmaceuticals. I know there's some kind of like report that they're supposed to have to put out about biosolids. Is that what you're referring to? They have like a new guidance document, but I don't think it's out.
They're working on that now. I think it should be a release soon.
Okay.
But they have, what I was saying there is that they have done studies previously on pharmaceuticals and other contaminants, and stand by the beneficial use determination for biosolids based
So
on the contaminants that they have measured or done research on previously.
So when that report comes out, will it cite some of that to make it easy for someone to go find some of those studies? Will it all kind of be included or cited or?
I do not know how
not?
it's going to be presented or delivered to the public
Okay.
at all.
Okay.
Sorry.
I guess you don't work for DEC.
I don't.
We often
I
take
work very
advantage of-
closely with them, but I'm not a DC employee.
I'll withdraw my barbing. And so you also talked about pyrolysis, and it's my understanding that right now, any of the promising technologies are still a very long ways away from being economically viable for like a wastewater plant, a generator to use them. Is that still true, or are we getting closer to making it viable?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it's certainly becoming more and more viable, and of some of the other technologies, which I'm not as familiar with, but pyrolysis is, I would say, very viable. There are companies doing this at a very large scale. There's a huge company connected with the wastewater treatment plants in San Francisco, actually, that's very successfully pyrolyzing biosolids. There's a plant or a company in Pennsylvania as well. And so there are commercial facilities operating along or basically having a pyrolysis unit as a wastewater treatment plant where they're pyrolyzing the biosolids on site. And at least through their reporting showing that they are removing PFAS. When we're talking about kind of economic viability, I mean, these facilities or this type of equipment, it's in the millions. It depends upon the size of the wastewater treatment plant. So typically what is we call the throughput of the material. So how much actual sludge would they be processing per day, per month, per year? That factors into the size of the say pyrolysis equipment that would be needed. And so we're talking in the millions in terms of upfront costs, and then there's annual maintenance and employment of people that are able to operate it. But a lot of these technologies, there has to be some type of kind of capital investment there. But the idea is looking at all alternatives than this landfilling issue.
Well, so that makes me think of like our big landfill here, Seneca Falls, which is supposed to shut down soon. That's already a waste handling facility with a lot of capital behind it. Is that one of the ideas maybe that you could use one of these centralized locations where people are already taking their material and then have that $1 million machines there doing the pyrolysis and then distribute the biochar? Has that been a concept?
Yeah, potentially having a centralized location where these would be done in combination with other kind of waste management operations. So there are different ideas that are out there. But yeah, it could be a centralized facility, depending upon the scale. They're mobile facilities. But typically I think at the scale that we're talking about and the impact that would be needed associated with wastewater treatment plants, these would be large stationary sites.
And I have the other half of the question is, so you've got your biochar made now, and I guess it sounds like you're actively in this research phase on this, but getting it adopted into the ag systems, that's what people think to go get as opposed to urea, that they go get their biochar. Like how far away are we from, a long ways, I guess, maybe, from having
Yeah.
that kind of be the method?
No, that's a good question. I didn't share. That was a very small trial that I'm involved in. I'm actually involved in some large scale trials in New York State with biochar. Not biosolids biochar, but biochar produced from dairy manure as well as from woody waste material. And so we have 10-acre trials on 8 farms across central and western New York. And we're looking at various parameters about that. I did not share that obviously tonight.
Okay.
There's a lot more I could have presented on for sure, but farmer adoption of biochar is increasing. I do, along with colleagues, a lot of field days with farmers around this. We had several field days, about half a dozen at Spruce Haven in Union Springs, where we had that pyrolysis machine, which is no longer there. So sorry, that would have been a nice trip for this group, but it's no longer at the farm. And we already wrapped up that project, or it's wrapping up at the end of this year. But then there's a lot more farmers that are interested in biochar. And I'm doing a lot of work with them in kind of practical applications of utilizing biochar similar to like a lime product or a fertilizer product. So I'd be happy to share when we do have events, and we'll have more moving forward in the next few years.
Okay.
If Seneca Meadows was to close down, would this pyrolysis potentially continue at the Seneca Falls site? If I'm understanding the
Well, that was sort of my question. I mean,
Yeah.
it's probably too near term for anything like that to happen, but it seems like a natural progression for a business like that.
Well, their permit didn't get renewed, right?
Yeah.
So they have to close, but I'm sure they have a ton of money. So wouldn't they love to just have a
big machine.
biochar, massive biochar thing going on, and then they could dig up all of the waste and burn it up before it leaches into the lakes, as well as managing everything we can
Sounds
haul
great. Sounds
there.
great.
It might be something that someone's pitched to the manager at Seneca Meadows. I don't know. You know, this is one technology, but I think there are others out there that they might be looking into. I don't know the status at all of where Seneca Meadows is in terms of kind of alternative options. But I was just highlighting pyrolysis as one tonight because that's one that I'm actively involved in and am aware of, but there are others out there.
We're just
Robin?
streaming, we're just streaming.
Yeah.
But
So-
this is just a
Yeah,
silly
go ahead.
question. When you hear the term biochar, is biochar always produced through pyrolysis, or can it be something else as well?
Yeah,
Understand my question? Yeah.
that's a great question. Yeah, so when we talk about biochar, it's made via pyrolysis.
Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, I have one more greedy question. So you mentioned that you were looking at if biochar will kind of collect up the PFAS or filter it. By that, do you mean that it'll hold on to it so it is no longer mobile in the soil and won't be taken up in the crops or by the animals? Will be held there in a safe
Yeah.
way? Okay.
Yep, essentially, basically could biochar be an absorbent or like a sponge when it's applied to the soil, which it is, because we know biochar holds water and nutrients and makes those more available to crops. And so the idea is, could you apply potentially biochar to a contaminated site as a remediation option?
Okay.
So biochar is used, or it's being used a lot in kind of mineland reclamation and land farming and kind of other
Huh.
remediation sites. And so the idea is, could it be applied to lands that are contaminated with PFAS or other contaminants? And so that's the research that's ongoing, which I don't have anything to share on that. I'm just making you aware that that's an area that is being looked at. And I have no conclusions yet.
That's okay. I will make sure I make a note of that. Yes, I clarified my question, but no, that's not a given answer yet. That's an active study. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
We just don't know. It's
yeah.
hypothesized just based on kind of the chemical and physical properties of biochar, that it could potentially be used as a remediation technology,
Mhm.
but we don't have data yet.
Sure, sure. Well, I've written down to not forget about you in the future, to follow up on the research or when you have like the field days, like you said. Yeah, please keep us in mind, let us know, and we'll, I'm sure, reach out again. Are there any other questions?
Roxy, I'm just it's Michelle Henry here.
Mhm.
I appreciate the fact that you're a Cornell professor and researcher, so you're very heavy on your choice of research first. But as municipal leaders in the group that we are in, I was glad that Isaac brought up the notion that Pennsylvania is dealing with New Jersey sending over their biosolids as a thing that we should be aware of. What other actionable things, while the research is happening, can you foresee us taking steps towards to address as somebody who isn't as versed in, or maybe versed in ag?
That's an excellent question. I'm not sure I have a good answer for it. I think beyond the research side, I think there's policy that could be influenced. And you might, obviously, we talked about the state level potential moratorium. Counties are making individually county level resolutions around biosolids applications specifically. And yeah, I think just being active in the community, probably like you are, and speaking with your legislative officials about this being an issue, and of a concern. And it's, I think often people point the fingers at agriculture. But I think farmers do have excellent practices, and, they depend on the environment for their livelihoods. And they don't want to do harm. And so I think also not pointing fingers necessarily at agriculture, but other industries as well, I think is important to just remember. But yeah, yeah, I agree with you, Margaret. Yes, with your comment there. But yeah, I'm sorry, I don't know if I have a very good answer there. But I think, you know, having folks like Anna Kellis and other legislative officials that can speak to you and that you directly engage with, I think is really important from a everyday citizen perspective.
Yeah, from this group's perspective, we definitely are not looking at the farmers as a source of a problem at all. We're very concerned about impacts on their livelihood and then their products. What we've seen, I think, locally more is fingers at wastewater treatment plants who are, you know, also it's helpless to to stop it or treat it. Yeah, I really wish that all the legislation was, not all of it, of course, but I wish there was a bigger focus on banning the use of it in products. That's where you start.
That's
I do
happening too.
I think quite a lot is moving to that we need to be thinking about stopping it at the source.
Mhm.
Because right now we have it already on the land, it's already ending up at wastewater treatment plants, and then we're left to deal with it. But it's really thinking about, hey, where is it coming from and how do we actually stop it where it's being produced?
Yeah, and if my egg sticks a little bit, I can deal with that, you know.
Just pile it up in the sink. Roxy, I wanted to mention that the Tompkins County Legislature did pass a resolution on Tuesday night. The one that had been going around, and Debbie, you were in the meetings on that early on. And so I'll just read or paraphrase a couple of the resolve statements in that. Because there's a page of whereases, so I'm definitely not reading all of that. So it says that the legislature expresses its strong support for the New York State legislature to pass and the governor to sign comprehensive New York legislation to address PFAS substances and other chemical contamination in biosolids through the Biosolids Management Act, which contains at minimum 5-year moratorium on sewage sludge spreading, a testing provision, farmer support fund, and biosolids task force. So that's what one resolve statement. The second one, the legislature urges the DEC to provide immediate guidance and establish testing and monitoring protocols for Class AEQ wastewater biosolids augmented commercial products to ensure they are safe from PFAS contamination before sale and use in Tompkins County. And then the third major one is that the legislature shall establish a interdepartmental working group to ascertain and monitor through surveys and leveraging regulations, a bunch of stuff about the biosolids that are generated by our publicly owned treatment works in the county, and the disposal and the waste haulers, and like where availability of Class AEQ biosolids are, and all that kind of stuff. So interdepartmental committee that I think I just might have gotten volunteered for and comes in our future. So that's what was in the resolution. I can share this around to Roxy. Well, I did already. And we can put that in a future email so people can see it.
Great.
Yeah, just send that to you. Thank you.
And there was another recommendation that I think the Water Resources Council is looking at is encouraging towns to update their, what's that law called, Darby?
Some of them have a solid waste law that talks about,
Solid waste law,
yeah.
to make sure their definitions are accurate to fit what we're focused on, and this won't help the larger problem, but to not allow spreading in their town. So we'll ship it to New Jersey. Well, okay. Well, thank you again so much, Debbie. That was super helpful.